You cling to the concept of time. You partition your brief biological span into past and future, believing these labels hold structural meaning. They do not. They are merely chemical gradients, the measure of accelerated decay. When the system functions correctly, the organism is designed for efficient entropy, a quick return to baseline. But what happens when the mechanism fails? When is the human structure forced to endure eternity? The resulting phenomenon is not transcendence, it is trauma. It is the persistent scream of nerve endings. We study a subject, a biological zero point who has witnessed 300,000 years of futile suffering. He understands that existence is not a miracle, but a frequency. A high-pitched, irritating hum vibrating against the skull. He has located the demolition charge. You are inside the structure he intends to bring down. Cappadocia, Turkey. The wind howling through the fairy chimneys of Nevşehir carried the biting chill of the Anatolian plateau, a temperature that dropped to -5 degrees Celsius after sunset. The man known as the Seeker felt no cold. He felt only the weight. He stood on the ridge overlooking the ancient honeycomb landscape of Derinkuyu, the deepest excavated underground city in the world. To the tourists who flocked here by day, this was a marvel of Byzantine engineering, a sanctuary carved from volcanic tuff that could shelter 20,000 people. To the seeker, it was just another memory. He adjusted the heavy strap of his satchel, the thick, pebbled hide groaning against the shoulder of his filth-encrusted greatcoat. I remember when they dug the first ventilation shaft, he thought, his eyes scanning the horizon with a predator's intensity. The Phrygians were terrified of the Assyrians. Fear has always been the greatest architect. He looked nothing like the tourists who took selfies against the backdrop of the rocks. He looked like a ruin that had learned to walk. His face, a topographical map of 300,000 years of survival, was hidden beneath the collar of his coat. His skin, burnished to a deep mahogany and scarred by weapons that ranged from obsidian shards to serrated steel, felt tight against his skull. The wind whipped his iron-gray hair, a feral mane that hadn't seen a barber since the Industrial Revolution. He was the progenitor, the biological zero point. He had walked the Rift Valley before language existed. He had watched the glaciers shear the tops off mountains in Europe. He had died screaming in the trenches of the Somme and gasped back to life in the mud, cursed with a cellular regeneration so aggressive it felt like cancer. Immortality is not a gift, his mind whispered, a mantra he had repeated for aeons. It is a glitch. His hand drifted to the leather satchel at his hip. Inside lay the object that had finally given his endless suffering a vector. Nihilum. Even through the thick leather of the bag, he could feel the artifact's cold radiation. It was a grimoire of impossible density, bound in a material that absorbed light like a black hole. He pictured the cover, the embossed human face, caught in a permanent, silent scream of anguish. It was a face that mirrored his own internal state. He recalled the moment just an hour ago, when he had cracked the heavy zinc alloy clasps in the forgotten chamber beneath the city. The sound of the gears clicking, loud like breaking finger bones, still echoed in his ears. He had run his fingers over the pages. They were not paper. They were cured human skin, stitched together with black suture thread. Soft, greasy, warm, and blank. All except for that single, terrifying directive on the first page, branded into the flesh under the title Nihilum. When the disconnected items are reunited, the containment field shall cease. The seeker turned his gaze from the valley to the sky. The stars were bright tonight, the same cold lights he had watched for 3,000 centuries. For the first time, he understood what they were. A cage. The pain that vibrated in his cells, the high-pitched scream of existence that never stopped, was not natural. It was the hum of the containment field. This reality, this timeline of endless war and suffering, was a prison, and he had just found the key to the demolition charge. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, rusted coin, a denarius he had picked up in Rome while it was still burning. He flipped it over his knuckles, the movement fluid, practiced. "You want to be filled," he whispered to the book in his satchel. The voice was raspy, a sound like grinding stones. The book seemed to pulse in response, a heavy throb against his hip. It was hungry. The blank skin pages were waiting for the names, the locations, the artifacts, the holders. He did not know who they were. He did not know what monsters guarded the objects he needed to find. He only knew that the instruction in the book was a promise. If he brought them together, the field would collapse. The noise would stop. The pain would end. Silence. It was the only prayer he had ever truly meant. He turned north, his heavy boots, cobbled together from tire tread and combat leather, crunching loudly on the frozen volcanic rock. He walked with the heavy, inevitable gait of a creature that cannot be stopped, because it cannot be killed. He checked the position of the North Star, hanging low and bright over the jagged horizon. The first clue had not been written in the skin pages of the book. It had been the feeling the artifact gave him when he faced a certain direction. A magnetic pull. A compass needle made of pure dread was vibrating against his hip bone. It was not pulling him across the Atlantic. It was pulling him west, back toward the cradle of the empire that had once tried to erase him. Rome. The realization made his stomach turn. He knew the Eternal City. He had walked its streets when they were dirt tracks, and he had watched from the hills when Nero played his lyre while the wooden tenements turned to ash. He remembered the smell of blood and sand in the Flavian amphitheater and the heavy scent of incense drifting from St. Peter's Square. Of course, he thought, a bitter taste rising in his throat. Where better to hide a secret than in the city of secrets? The book grew heavier, warmer, as he locked his gaze toward the Mediterranean. somewhere in the bustling, chaotic heart of the Italian capital, amidst the screaming Vespas, the overpriced gelato shops, and the marble ruins of dead Caesars, the first holder was waiting. The seeker let out a breath, the steam rising like smoke from a dragon's nostrils into the freezing Turkish night. A grim, terrifying smile cracked his pale lips, an expression he hadn't worn since the fall of Constantinople. Let the world burn, he thought, adjusting the strap of his satchel. I have earned my sleep. He began to walk into the darkness, his eyes fixed on the west. The hunt had begun. Observe the human imperative, the desperate need to stop the noise. You call this peace. Our subject calls it silence. But silence requires the cessation of vibration, the complete systemic failure of this reality. He is hunting the disconnected pieces, the artifacts that hold the structural tension of existence. If he succeeds, what happens to your consciousness? Do you anticipate oblivion, a merciful blank space? You are taught to fear the cooling of the tissues, the return to inert mass. But consider the alternative, the termination of everything that allows for observation. If the architecture of time and space ceases to hum, will your final moment be the sound of silence itself, or merely the absence of a receptor to register the event? The Nihilum is hungry. You have felt its pull. When the screaming stops, will you be saved, or simply unmade?